Today we're visiting with Jim Thompson, class of 1968. Jim graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Architectural Construction. He's a distinguished alumnus of the university, an outstanding alumnus of the College of Architecture, and a member of the Corps of Cadets Hall of Honor. Jim, welcome.
Thank you.
Jim, tell us about your early childhood. Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in a couple places in the brush country of South Texas on an oil camp until I was about 7, and then my dad was an oil field worker, and the offshore drilling started occurring in the early 50s in the Gulf of Mexico, so we moved down to the mouth of the Mississippi River, and we lived about 100 yards from the levee of the Mississippi, so I pretty much had a life of Huckleberry Finn. I played in the river and rode logs, but grew up the rest of my time in Louisiana.
Well, how in the world did you get from Louisiana to Texas A&M?
Well, I had a good friend who was 2 years older than me and had graduated from the same high school, and he was at A&M. He was in the band, and every time he came home we would meet and he would tell me how wonderful Texas A&M was. And I was looking at other schools. I had been an LSU fan and an Ole Miss fan, and my mother wanted me to go to the University of Texas, and my dad wanted me to go to OU, so I made them both mad and went to Texas A&M.
That's great. And your dad was in the oil field, so what made you decide to pursue construction as your career?
Well, I think probably the petroleum engineering curriculum had a lot to do with it, like Physics 219 and 220. I had done real well my first semester, but I got pretty involved in the Corps of Cadets and my grades started to drop off. I actually lost a scholarship that I had, and I got to thinking that I'd always been interested in building things as a kid, had an erector set, and I thought maybe building construction would be something that I would be more adept at.
That's cool. And what Corps outfit were you in?
I was in Squadron 4. We were called the 4 Aces.
Wow. And I know that being a fish in the Corps requires all sorts of teamwork, and that really ties to one of our components, collaboration. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, as a fish, you come in and everybody's equal, whether you are wealthy or poor or we're a great football player or whatever, it doesn't matter. We're all the same. We're the same uniform, and we're asked to do things as a class. We're taught to support each other, and we didn't know we were collaborating with each other at the time. We were just working together to be a strong team and to learn teamwork and discipline and to support your buddy, and that's probably a good lesson for all of us.
A lot of great friendships built during that time.
Oh, great friendships. It's just like, I liken it to my dad had lifelong relationships with the men that he went to war with in World War II, and we weren't at war, but we were in pretty intense situations for a year, and it was difficult, and a lot of guys didn't make it, but those who did, we had a bond for a long time.
Now you've had an affinity for the military kind of since an early age in your life. How did that all begin, and where did your military alignment occur?
Well, in my family, like many families, my aunts and my uncles and my dad were all in World War II. My grandfathers were in World War I. My dad was a Marine in the South Pacific, and another brother was a Marine, and one brother was a B-17 pilot, one was a tail gunner on B-17. So I grew up asking questions and learning about World War II, and had to decide between whether I wanted to be a Marine or a pilot, and I just thought I needed to be an Air Force pilot, so that was my goal.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of your early lessons of leadership kind of started in the Corps Cadets because, you know, I know one of our 8 characteristics of leadership is competition, and your time in the Corps had to have lots of competition. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I learned probably more about competition than I ever had up to that point. From the time you get there as a fish, you're competing individually. The prize at the end of the year for a fish at that point in time was who was going to be the guide-on bearer. That was kind of the mark of who was the best fish. And so I aspired to be the guide-on bearer, but all the way through my career in the Corps, getting to be guide-on bearer and first sergeant and commanding officer of my outfit and getting to be a volunteer, all of it, we were competing with each other constantly, not only as individuals, but then each outfit, we were competing with each other to see who was going to be the General Moore Award winner,
right.
Who was best in marching, who was best in academics and athletics. So it was a constant thing, and really was a good lesson because, as you know, our American enterprise system is built on competition. When we get out into industry, we compete continually. So I learned about that.
And it all kind of carries through to today, doesn't it?
It does. It's still prevalent. That's what really makes all of us be our best, I think.
There was a weekend in January of 1969 that was very important to you. I think several things happened during that very weekend. What was it?
Everything came to a head. Fortunately, I had a blind date about 6 months before that, and she would become my wife, and we ended up getting married, and I got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Air Force and graduated all on the same weekend in January of 1969. So we managed to make it to Caldwell for our honeymoon, and then reported for duty the next day at Randolph Air Force Base to start pilot training, which was, of course, my dream at the time.
Well, interesting. I know you dream about things your whole life, and all of a sudden you show up one day at the base and it all begins. What was pilot training like?
Well, once again, that competition thing was very prevalent. There was quite a few of us who started in pilot training, and a lot of them washed out. And the competition was keen. You were not only competing with each other, but against the airplane as well, trying to learn how to fly 3 different types of airplanes. The last one being a supersonic advanced jet trainer, and you really had to prepare a lot and study a lot, and also be gifted with the tools to fly. Some of the guys came in with a lot of experience in flying, but they just weren't used to the type of flying that we did. You know, when you put on a helmet, put the oxygen mask on, and all that gear, it changes everything. So.
And it really kind of ties to one of our leadership characteristics is competence. And it really ties to being competent, doesn't it?
We were measured constantly every day by our instructor pilot. We were graded every ride about how competent we were. We were either excellent, good, satisfactory, or unsatisfactory, and you didn't want to do that very often or you get washed out.
Right.
So every day we were graded, and then every so often we would have a check ride with a special instructor pilot to decide if we were making the grade. So
that's kind of a microcosm of life in total, isn't it?
It is. We're being measured all the time against something, and as a general contractor, I'm measured against, for the most part, my competitors. I have to be equal to or better than them, or I'm not going to survive.
So flash forward to Del Rio, Texas in the June of 1973. By now, you and Donna Beth have 2 young sons, and you have a big dream. And what was that dream? It must have taken some great courage to take on that dream.
We were in Del Rio because I was an instructor pilot. I got a T-38 was my airplane that I got in pilot training, and at Laughlin Air Force Base. And we had been in for about 4.5 years, and I made a decision. My next assignment was an F-4 Phantom, which had been my dream, but the Air Force wanted 7 more years, and I decided I didn't want to make it a career. And I had this second dream after becoming an Air Force pilot that I wanted to be an airline pilot. And I thought that was the perfect job, just work half the time and have a glorious, fantastic time flying airplanes. So we decided to separate from the Air Force, and I sent out resumes to 35 different airlines, knowing that I was going to get hired. I was sure of it. And then in June of '73, when I separated, the Arabs did the oil embargo.
Yeah, I remember it well.
And what happened was the airlines started furloughing pilots that they had and cutting down routes, and I didn't even get an interview from any of those. And here I was with married and 2 rugrats and no job.
But as it turns out, after a while, you got to blend construction with your dream. How'd that work out?
Well, fortunately, I fell back on my, and by the way, this is probably a good lesson. You need to be prepared for things that happen that you don't plan on. Right. I didn't plan on going into construction. I thought I was going to be an airline pilot. But fortunately, I went and interviewed with a big company in Houston and another one in Dallas, and they both offered me jobs. And because the vice president of the company, the one in Dallas, said, oh, by the way, I'll let you fly my airplane too.
Wow.
That was it. That was an easy choice. So I was able to continue flying, not only for the company, but also personally, and still learn the construction business.
That's fabulous. So after 4 years with Beck, you made a critical decision to change jobs. And what happened during this important time in your life?
Well, as I began to get some experience and watch what other successful men who had been in the business for a while were doing, one of my friends who had been a project manager at Beck, he was hired by another company, became president there, and he lured me over to go to work for them. I became vice president there, and I began to move up and began to think about the fact that I might be able to do this on my own. And my next job was with the same man who hired me out of the Air Force, who let me fly. He started the company, and I went with him and spent another 4 years improving my work and career, and that got me to the 10-year point, and that's when I decided I'd built up a good reputation in the industry with the subcontractors and vendors that you have to work with that are so critical to our success, and that's when I decided to hang up my own shingle and give it a shot.
Yeah, during this same time, your third son Cody was born, so there was a little pressure to perform there.
We were adding to the group. While we were in the Air Force, there was something called zero population growth that they kind of told all of us. They didn't require it, but they kind of encouraged us second lieutenants. You probably only need to have 2 kids. Well, when we did that, but when we got out later on, we decided,
why not?
We need to have another one, yeah.
And then along comes Cody.
He was supposed to be the girl, but we're glad he came along.
In starting your own business, people trusted you. You had built a reputation of a man of character, and character is another one of the important characteristics we have in leadership. Talk a little bit about that and the courage it took to start your own company, because that's a leap of faith.
Well, it was. We did not amass much of a fortune at that point in time. I'd been an employee, and it made reasonable wages, but with 3 kids, it took just about everything I made to pay the bills. But with my reputation that I felt like I had developed with the industry, and I had talked to some people before I made the decision. I didn't make it just alone. I talked to some industry leaders and also some of the subcontractors that I would be working with. And I said, what do you think, what if I started my company? Would you work with me? And they said, absolutely, we would. We'll support you in any way we can. So that gave me some confidence, and I had built up a pretty good resume of projects that I had built as a project manager, as a senior project manager, and as my last job was senior vice president of the company, and we were doing $100 million worth of work. And so I had a good start of a career, and I just felt like I could parlay that into a successful construction company.
Now, after some 34 years of owning and operating GRT Construction, I know you just got tons of stories to tell, but one of the things I like most when I hear you speak is you talk about the importance of communication, and what's that meant to you and your business, your communication skills and those that you've imbued in your employees.
Well, even going back to A&M as being able to take advantage of some of the leadership positions, I had to be able to communicate with the cadets in my squadron and other. But in the Air Force as well, we were forced to stand up and give presentations on safety and pilot and airplane instruction and all that. So and then once you start running work and you have employees working for you, you either become a good communicator and become efficient, or you don't. And I had learned along the way with some really good mentors that communication, a simple, clear message, and being a good listener as well to folks that work with you and for you, I could tell that was a powerful message. And as we would go sometimes to interview for projects, and they would call us back and say, well, congratulations, Jim, we've awarded you the project. we would obviously say, well, thank you, we're ready to go, we've got a good team. By the way, why did you hire us? And inevitably, they would always say, the owners would say something along these lines, and I've even heard these words, well, we just felt like we could trust your group.
Wow.
Well, somehow, in 45 minutes to an hour, we were able to communicate effectively with them and let them know what our values were and show them our work and what actions we had taken to mitigate problems. And in that period of time, they felt like we could be trusted. But communication, being able to talk to blue-collar people and white-collar people is essential for a general contractor to be successful.
And you really built that in as a foundation of your business.
It is.
It's an anchor.
I require, as best I can, and train my people to be really good communicators.
Another thing that comes up inevitably when you talk about the built environment is the subject of creativity. And so often the stereotype is that creativity is in the purview of the architects and the engineers. But of your opinion, you need to be creative as a builder too, correct?
You do, and I've always kind of thought of the architects and artists. My wife is a bit of an artist, so they're the creative ones. But when I reflect on what we have to do as general contractors, and you know, the means and methods that are mentioned in the spec books from the architects and engineers, well, that's what we have to be creative at. How are we going to build this project? What type of cranes? How many cranes? What type of formwork are we going to use? So we all get together, and I like to get everybody in a room and talk about a job, about how we're going to build it, and we brainstorm. And we are interested in what the young people have to say as well. In a meeting about 3 years ago, and I encourage my young project managers and project engineers to participate. One of them raised their hand and made a suggestion on something we were wrestling with that saved an owner $500,000 and about 2 months on the schedule.
Wow.
So, and it was a creative solution to a problem we had. So we're not quite as creative as architects and artists, but we have to be open-minded when we build buildings.
So those young people that choose construction science as a career path can't just go after 7 C's. They've got to get that 8th C, which is creativity.
They really do.
In the mix. So your 3 sons are active in the construction business today too. How did Lance, Ryan, and Cody kind of get involved in the business, and what are they doing today?
Well, I did not require them to get into the construction, but they saw how much I enjoyed it and what satisfaction I got out of building things. And I would take them to the projects and show them some of my work along the way. And they were inquisitive, but they all ended up, Lance has a construction management degree. Ryan and Cody, our youngest, both have construction science degrees from Texas A&M. And Lance is a senior project manager with my firm. I required all of them. I said, if you want to go to work for me, you have to work for another contractor for 5 years. And they all have done that. Lance was a superintendent for almost 17, 18 years, and he's moved into the office and become a senior project manager. Ryan is now, as of January 1st of 2014, president of the company.
Fantastic.
And Cody, he has been out on the West Coast for 12 years ever since he graduated, and we're not sure if he's coming back, but he has a place in the company if he chooses to.
But they all have construction in their blood.
They do, and they enjoy it, and have now that they're working with me, they're beginning to have some of the same wonderful experiences and the satisfaction that I got out of my career.
Now you're at a different point in your life. You've clearly made a shift from success, which you're highly successful, to significance. So what does that mean in your life today, and how have your priorities changed, and what kind of things are you doing from a leadership capacity today? Well,
fortunately, I've got a little more time now, late in my career, now that the boys are kind of running the company and doing the heavy lifting. And I realized somewhere along the way that I got much more satisfaction out of helping others or empowering them, just like my employees. I learned a lot from some of my mentors, but I always wanted to have a working environment at our company where, and I'd tell them, the people that work for me, I want you to, when you get up in the morning, that you can't wait to get to work, that you love what you're doing, you're proud of what you're doing, and you really enjoy it. And I realized how much satisfaction I got out of providing that safe, secure, and challenging environment for them. And now I have a little more time, and I want to try to speak to young people at Texas A&M for sure, and the Corps Cadets and others in the College of Architecture about what I've learned over these last many years.
Giving back.
And help them be more prepared as they enter either the service or industry. And I think that's one thing that I can help with, and that gives me satisfaction to be able to give back not only to my university, but young people are our future. And I made many mistakes along the way. I want to try to help them avoid some of those.
So you've been one of the driving forces behind this C8 Leadership Initiative that we're celebrating and we're talking about today. In fact, you coined the phrase, "Do you see leadership in you?" Why is the cultivation of leaders so important to you at this point in your life?
Well, the world is screaming for good leadership and good followership. It's like a two-edged coin, heads and tails. You can't have one without the other. If leaders don't lead, followers don't follow. All of the tenets of good leadership are the same tenets and characteristics that followers need to have. I was a good follower before I ever got the opportunity to lead. And I want to talk to these young kids that have aspiring careers, and some of them probably don't feel like they're leaders. They may mature into leaders later on, but they need to also know and learn how to be great followers, because that is what makes companies successful, where you get everyone involved in the decision making and whatever the core business is that you're involved in.
And they need to know what to look for in a leader, correct?
They do. And it's important, I stress to them the importance of their own personal conduct to start off with. I even sometimes ask them, if you're sitting in your room or in some venue and there's half a dozen of you around, does anybody want to know what your opinion is? And if they do, it's because they probably respect you as a person and they trust you and your opinion has value. And if your opinion has value, you're going to have influence. And if you have influence over folks, you're going to be a leader. And if you have good values and principles that you live by, you're going to be a real good leader.
Jim, next year is kind of a big year for you. You celebrate your 50-year class reunion. Know you'll be happy to see former classmates and friends. And as you reflect on your time at A&M and your career after A&M, what do you tell people about Texas A&M University?
Well, I tell them that's where really I learned a lot of good lessons that helped me as I begin my career. But I guess more important than that, I want them to realize that not only their words, but their actions that's what they'll be measured by. And to make sure that they take into account what they believe in and what they stand for, their values and principles, these core values that we talk about so much at A&M: respect, excellence, leadership, loyalty, integrity, selfless service. And you could create several more. You were a Boy Scout, I were a Boy Scout. Right. We know all of those. If you could build a company based on those values and actually implement them and encourage others to put them in their life, you're going to have great success in whatever you choose to do.